everybody. This is Jung-ae. So today we're going to be talking about section 3 of part 1 of the new Relevance series, which is talking about the realities of world hunger. So first, let's start off with a quote from True Father. So true parents have always looked toward the deepest hell, the most miserable situation, and True Father says, in God's Will in the Ocean, the problems of the world aren't so important to you. There are situations today in some countries where millions and millions of people are starving. Can you understand that? No, you cannot understand that. What I have to do is connect the better side of this world to the spiritual world. And then I have to turn my eyes down to the deepest hell, and I have to pay attention to the most miserable situations. I have to solve that whole thing. So Father, as the Father of all humankind, right, as the Messiah, he loves every single human deeply, right? And he naturally wants to care for the people who are in the most miserable situation. So let's review what we talked about last week, which my mom presented. So in the last presentation, The Road to a Global Leader, we discussed how true parents of humankind look toward the most miserable situations of the world, and that we have to unite with their perspective as a parent and consider the world issues such as hunger problems as our own problem, and we have to have interest in it, right? This is the most important point in understanding the Ocean Providence. In order to understand and unite with true parents who are parents of humankind, we have to be able to understand, the people that they care for. We have to understand the issues that they care for, and one of those issues is the hunger problem. Your Father has also said that if we don't understand this point, we can never understand his actions. And if we are not even interested in the hunger issue and these kinds of problems, we won't even be able to unite in the heart with true parents and won't be able to understand why he even went out to the ocean, why he even did Ocean Providence. True Father says in his autobiography that when I look at the world situation, I feel that securing sufficient food supplies is the most pressing problem. We cannot afford to be apathetic just because we and our immediate families are not facing hunger. So oftentimes in developed countries, such as Japan, United States, we consider the issue of hunger as not the most urgent issue, right? We don't really see it affecting us too much, right? We're never completely hungry, right? And we also go around like our countries, our cities, and we don't really see too much of the problem around the world either, right? And around our country. So we don't see it as such a big issue. We might think, you might feel like it's someone else's affairs. It's not really our responsibility to take care of it. Maybe it's the government's responsibility, or maybe it's politicians' responsibilities. But True Father says that someone who has nothing to do with me is suffering somewhere across the ocean. Oh, sorry, this is something that we might feel like, right? We might feel like saying someone who has nothing to do with me is suffering somewhere really far across the ocean, so it's a faraway problem. It feels like that toward us. However, it shouldn't be like that. We should have interest in the hunger problem and understanding. Right? So the hunger problem, right? True Father says that no one has ever considered this hunger problem. Although I am 80 years old, members are making excuses and doing whatever they can to prevent me from going fishing. They do that because they do not understand why I am doing it. So we don't understand the hunger problem. We don't understand the hunger issue. And because we don't understand the hunger issue, we don't understand the reason behind why True Father goes out fishing. True Father goes out fishing because he wants to save the hungry people. But if we don't understand this reasoning, we don't understand the hunger issue, then of course, naturally, we won't understand why True Father is even going out to the ocean. So if we don't regularly talk or think about how almost 1 billion people aren't able to obtain enough food, or that 9 million people starve to death each year, then, we aren't able to connect with True Father's heart, who had been thinking about them with an aching heart every single time he went out on the water. Even in the Bible, Jesus says in John 3:17, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? So the reason why we cannot fully grasp the Ocean Providence, right, is because we are not truly interested in the hunger problem. We're not truly interested in the reasoning behind behind Ocean Providence. And if there is no true interest, it's hard to truly understand what true parents are even doing. So in addition, in order to understand the plan called the Ocean Providence, we first have to know about the hunger problem that it is trying to solve. And in that sense, today's presentation that focuses on understanding the reality of hunger problem is one of the most important, if not the most important, for us to really understand Ocean Providence. In order to really begin understanding Ocean Providence and God and True Parents' heart in it, we have to understand the issue of hunger. So let's talk about it, right? So during this presentation, we'll be talking about 5 points, and they will be covered in this presentation. So first is historically, how did the issue of starvation start? So we'll be talking about the history of starvation throughout human history. 2 is why the hunger problem is serious and urgent, why we should care about the hunger problem. 3 is what is the cause of the hunger problem? What actually caused it? And 4 is why it's so difficult to resolve the hunger problem and why it still continues to be an issue today. And 5 is how True Father specifically wanted to solve the hunger issue. So part 1 is, so every single age had a starvation issue. Every single age has experienced famines, all these different issues with food, right? Even in modern times when humanity has reached space already, right, we still struggle with hunger and poverty. Poverty spreads even within some cities in developed countries. So why do poverty and hunger even exist? Well, first let's talk about how starvation even began. So let's talk about the history of starvation and refugees. We can even talk about it from the biblical perspective. So if we take a look in the Bible, we see that famines occur multiple times. Abraham went to Egypt due to a famine. Isaac went to Gerar due to a famine. Jacob and his tribe went to Egypt due to a famine. Elimelech and Naomi also went to Moab due to famine. So those are some examples. And another example is Japan's history of starvation, history of famine. So there's so many famines, as you can see here, 4 great famines, right, among the 8 that are listed here. And this is just Japan, right? Japan is a very, very small country compared to many other countries in this world, and very small compared to the rest of the world entirely. And in just Japan, there were so many countless famines. And if we take a look at European history, they have struggled so much because of famine, and they have a staggering amount of recorded famines dating even back to 2000 BCE. So the world has experienced countless famines throughout history. But why? Why does hunger happen so often? Why does this issue persist throughout human history? Well, let's take a look at the beginning of the fallen history, which is the Garden of Eden, right? In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were originally living this hobby lifestyle, right? They were one with creation around them. And because they were one with creation around them, creation naturally produced food and naturally maintained, food for them. And they could live happily, they were thriving. However, after the fall, God told Adam, to Adam, God said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. So because of the fall, basically, rather than living a hobby lifestyle where we're completely one with the creation around us and creation naturally produces food for us, we've turned into a society where we are now slaves, right? We are slaves to food. We live a slave lifestyle and we work tirelessly, day and night in order to even just get food on the table. And in the modern day and age, it's not specifically food, it's money. However, we have to get money in order to get food on the table, but we live a lifestyle where, almost nobody enjoys, right? We're living forced to toil for the sake of getting food. So this all originated from the fall. So due to the fall, humanity fell into that state where we struggle with hunger and food problems. So the hunger problem will be solved at the end of the day, centered on the Messiah. Right? Since the fall caused the hunger problem, only at the end of the providence of restoration, which is the providence in order to reverse all things that happened during the fall, humanity will be able to overcome it, centering on the returning Messiah, who we know are true parents. True Father says that every year 20 million people die of starvation. That are 60,000 people a day. Is the President of the United States going to take responsibility for that? Will Gorbachev of the Soviet Union take responsibility? Who will take responsibility for this? Who in the world is going to do that? The true parents and the siblings of true parents have to take responsibility for it. So True Father said that he himself has to solve that whole thing, the issues of the world. So true father, who's the Messiah, has the responsibility, true parents who are the Messiah, has the responsibility to take that slave lifestyle in order to eat and return it back to the Garden of Eden lifestyle, which is the hobby lifestyle. So true parents are here to resolve this physical issue of hunger. So what are the 3 physical issues of the world that true father listed? So the fallen state of humanity has caused 3 major physical issues, and true father listed them in his autobiography. He says, the 3 greatest challenges of modern society are solving pollution problems, creating consciousness for protecting the environment, and increasing food production. So what are these? So true father aimed to bring about a peaceful world, as we discussed in earlier presentations, a world where no one goes hungry and no one sheds tears. And he considered the greatest physical problems of the world to be the food problem, pollution, and environmental sustainability and protection. So the 3 physical issues presented by true father in summary are pollution, environmental protection, and the food problems. So not only is the food problem a huge issue of humanity, but also environmental issues such as pollution and climate change that all originated from the fall. And true father, who is the Messiah, has stated that he himself, I have to solve that whole thing, the issues of the world. So he is taking responsibility for this. So that's the history of hunger. So now we're going to be talking about why the hunger problem is so serious and urgent. We now know the history of hunger, but why should we care? Why should we, as maybe citizens of America or Japan or some developed country, care about the hunger issue? Why should we as unificationists care? There are many problems in the world, right? There are many other problems that seem very serious. However, why did true father state that specifically the food problem is the most urgent problem, and that it is a problem of humanity's survival? So true father says that hunger is the greatest danger that humanity faces. However, many other people in this world, economic leaders, technological leaders, politicians, they all say different things, right? For example, Elon Musk, right, a multi-billionaire, has said that the biggest existential threat to humankind is actually artificial intelligence. Now, there's also Joe Biden, right? President Joe Biden has said that the climate change is the biggest current crisis in national security. Greta has also, expressed how climate change is a very huge problem for humanity. However, true father is saying that the food problem, not AI, not the climate change, but food problem is the most urgent danger for humanity. He says, the most pressing danger I felt as I traveled around the world is the food problem. Solving the food crisis cannot be put off for even a moment. So clearly, the problem of hunger is actually a lot more serious than we can even imagine. True father talked about how the hunger problem and the food problem is serious and urgent. In addition, he also showed its importance through his own actions by constantly going out fishing and investing greatly into the fishery businesses. So he was really giving his life for the sake of solving this hunger problem because he saw how serious and urgent it was. Even if the members couldn't see it, he himself saw it. So why is it so serious and urgent? So let's consider the seriousness and urgency of the hunger from the following points. So there are 5 points. 1 is the food problem affects a large number of population. 2 is that the annual death toll from hunger is comparable to the death toll from the most devastating war in human history. 3 is that the food problem causes serious physical disability to hundreds of millions of children. And 4 points. 4 is hunger destroys the spirit and deprives one of humanity. So these 4 points we're going to be talking about. So let's talk about the first point of why hunger is such a serious and urgent problem. It's because, 1, the food problem affects a huge population of people. So first of all, the food problem is serious simply due to the fact of the sheer number of people it affects around the world. About 810 million people around the world are being affected by world hunger. According to the UNWFP, of the world's total population of 7.7 billion people, about 811 million, which is 1 in 10, were experiencing food crisis in 2020. That means if you had 10 people in a room, the likelihood that one of them was suffering due to malnutrition, due to a hunger problem, was out of 10, right? So 810 million people is over double the population of the United States, and that's over 6 times the population of Japan. So world hunger as of 2021, these are the top 10 countries that were listed as top 10 of suffering from food crisis. So we're going to be talking about the top 3. So that's the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, and Ethiopia. So let's talk about Democratic Republic of Congo. So they're suffering from hunger issues, and the main cause of that is conflict. So conflict in the Congo began in 1994 when refugees were fleeing from a genocide that happened in a neighboring Rwanda, and these people basically turned into militias, right? And these militias are said to have killed millions and continue to kill many people to this day. So the international community, right, because they saw all this conflict in the Congo, right, the international community no longer wants to invest in the Congo, and they don't want to invest basically in the rebels who are basically collecting military funds from the underground resources. So it's said that because of this causes the worsening of the economy, and naturally, if the economy gets worse, it increases poverty and it forces Congolese miners into unemployment, which means they have no way of making money other than joining the rebel army. So then they're prompted to join the rebel army, and as a result, that exacerbates the conflict. So as of 2020, there were more than 100 armed groups in East Congo with more than 4.5 million internally displaced refugees. So that's Democratic Republic of Congo. Now let's talk about Afghanistan. So they have hunger issues, and the main cause of that is conflict and extreme or abnormal weather. So originally, more than 90% of the country's population were farmers, agricultural workers. But due to over 20 years of conflict, the infrastructure is no longer well developed. And on top of that, starting October 2020, the rainfall has become the lowest it's ever been in the past 40 years, causing water shortages. And naturally, that causes, that naturally affects negatively the amount of crops that the farmers are able to yield. So the UN reports that 40%, almost half of the grain that has been produced before has been lost. So by September 2021, 72%, 3/4 of the Afghanistan population fell into poverty, and the UN expects poverty to hit 97%, basically almost 100% in 2022. So conflict and poverty caused massive number of refugees, and by the year 2022, it is said that half of the population will fall into life-threatening food crisis. Then let's talk about Ethiopia. So for them, the food crisis, the main causes are drought, political corruption, and the locust plague. So Ethiopia has been poisoned by political corruption, unable to attract external investment. They suffer from ongoing economic instability, and in 2016, they suffered the worst drought in half a century. And in 2020, while the country was suffering the largest locust plague in the past 25 years, a civil war ended up erupting in northern Tigray over political control in November of the same year. So then the UN reported that 37% of the Tigray region's population was at stake in early 2022, and people managed to only eat an average of only 30% of the necessary calories. So that means that they're missing 70% of the necessary nutrients that they should be eating. So in 2019, it was reported that about 40% of Ethiopian children under the age of 5 were stunted due to malnutrition. We're going to be talking about what stunting exactly is later on in the presentation. Sorry. So that was point number 1. So that was talking about how much of the population hunger is affecting. So point number 2, why hunger is so serious and urgent is because the hunger death toll is higher than any war in history. Now, when we talk about death toll, a lot of people think about war because in wars, people die, right? Civilians die, armed soldiers die. People think about war when people talk about deaths, right? However, the death toll from hunger each year is actually comparable to the death toll of the most devastating war in human history. About 9 million number of deaths claimed by hunger. About 9 million people are killed or die because of hunger every single year. And this is almost equivalent to the deadliest war in human history, which is World War II. So let's talk about that. So in World War II, from 1939 to 1945, is known to have had the highest death toll in human history when including combatants and civilians from all nations. So the average annual death toll in that war over a period of about 6 years is estimated to be 10 million deaths per year. By comparison, though, the hunger problem kills about 9 million people per year. And this is indefinitely, right? World War II only lasted 6 years. And while that was devastating, 9 million people die from hunger indefinitely. And it has been well over just 6 years. So food shortage is basically the biggest killer of not just people in the world, but also children in the world. Right? According to a 2018 UNICEF report, an average of 3.1 million children die every year from hunger and malnutrition. So earlier we said that 9 million people die each year from malnutrition. However, 1/3 of those people that are dying are children, and children who are the future of society. They are the future of the world. They will grow up to be the future of society, right? However, 1/3 of the 9 million people who are suffering from malnutrition are children who are dying because of malnutrition. And half of the world's child's deaths, half of the deaths of children under the age of 5 in this world are caused by hunger-related issues. So approximately 3.1 million children die from hunger every single year. And for us who are, talking about world peace, and, we obviously want to protect the children. We want to help these children. However, 3.1 million of them are dying every single year because of malnutrition. So it's an issue that we cannot ignore. So point number 3, why hunger is so serious and urgent is because hunger causes physical disability for hundreds of millions of children. 160 million kids are under 5 are stunted. So a quarter of the world's children under 5 are stunted. An estimated 160 million children under the age of 5 worldwide are stunted due to malnutrition. This means that a quarter, 25% of the world's children under 5 are stunted and vulnerable to disease because they don't have enough food. So what exactly is stunting? I'm saying stunted a lot throughout this presentation. So what exactly is it? Well, due to malnutrition, children grow up shorter and weaker than an average child. Right? For example, 40% of children in sub-Saharan Africa have malnutrition problems that affect their growth. They are often much shorter in height, but the malnutrition also not only affects their height, but also their brain development as well. So not only do they grow up weaker physically and more prone to diseases, they also have trouble developing mentally. They have trouble retaining educational material. So in other words, hunger not only affects a child's physical growth, but also limits brain growth, causing permanent limitation to their human potential. So for example, if a child has the potential to become the Einstein of the age, right? They will never reach that potential just because of the fact that they don't have enough nutrients. So they become stunted both physically and mentally. And there's so many children, 160 million children, who are stunted because of this issue. So this is an example in Tanzania. Right? This photo shows how 40% of the children in Tanzania are stunted. So compared to the average height of children around the world, their physical development is slow and they are short. If you look at that white chalk line right above their heads, like all of them are shorter than that average line. And basically the people who created this photo, they said we couldn't find a 9-year-old in that area in Tanzania who stood taller than this line. They were all much shorter than that line. So basically their bodies are a lot more prone to illnesses, and it also affects their brain development. As such, they have no prospect to grow up to be productive adults, right? They can't physically work. They also mentally can't, take on complicated tasks. So does a country with 40% of the population in this kind of situation have any future? The answer is probably no, right? Bill Gates, a philanthropist, said that if you don't fix this problem, chronic malnutrition, everything else you do is not going to get you there. Not education, not infrastructure, not even good governance. So this is basically the whole process, right? When a child is grows up malnourished, right? They end up not getting the nutrients they need, so they become prone to illnesses. They have a small and weak body, and then they have brain development issues. So that leads to physically being unable to work. And it also leads to the loss of learning ability. So even if you give them food later on in life as an adult, they still won't be able to learn properly. They won't be able to do complicated tasks. So because of that, they are unable to work. They're unable to get a job that actually fulfills the needs that they need. And they continue to live a life of poverty. And because they continue to live a life of poverty, they continue to be malnourished. And it's just a cycle that continues on this way. Yeah, so due to a large portion of the population failing to reach productive adulthood, the vicious cycle of poverty persists, and the state of food shortage remains a chronic problem. As long as the issue of malnutrition in children exists, a huge problem will persist even if we have good governance, good educational institutions, or industries. Now, point number 4, final point of why hunger is so serious and urgent is because hunger erodes the spirit and deprives one of humanity. So the lack of food leads to mental disorders. As we said, it leads to developmental issues, right? So naturally, they become prone to mental disorders. In a 2020 study of food insecurity among low-income families in the United States found that the people inside a household suffering from food insecurity were 2.5 more times likely to be depressed. In the US, children who experienced food insecurity as children were 1.56 times more likely to develop PTSD and 1.53 times more likely to develop severe depression later on in life. So that basically means even if, a malnourished child or a person who suffers from food insecurity as a child grows up and doesn't suffer from food insecurity anymore, they still are followed by the effects of that childhood. They're affected by PTSD and they're more prone to have severe depression. So it's things like this that are caused by food insecurity and malnutrition. Hunger basically erodes the spirit and deprives a person of their humanity. Hunger is one of the most miserable mental conditions that a human being can experience. When a person is extremely hungry, people are forced to beg and steal for food whether they want to or not. If a father has 3 children and a wife, right? If his family is suffering from food insecurity, if his family is starving, he will naturally not want to just sit there and do nothing for them, right? He would be forced to go out and get food. He would be, whether that be to beg or to steal, whether that be to demean himself to a point where he has to beg and steal. And can you imagine as a child growing up in that kind of psychological state, right? It's likely that if you grow up in that kind of environment as a child, you will continue to face situations where you can't even think of human dignity, self-respect, or spirit of independence because you've grown up throwing away things like human dignity, self-respect, right? Human dignity, self-respect, talking about human rights and noble ideologies, that's a privilege that people who don't starve are able to have. But that's a privilege that people who are starving don't have. So True Father also talks about what he witnessed during his imprisonment in the Hunnam concentration camp in North Korea during the Korean War. Right? He explained the severe state of starvation that the prisoners were in. And I remember also when I was a kid and I was reading about this state of hunger, I was really shocked. It really scarred me, right? True Father said that, the prisoners, right, would fight for the chance to dig out the food from within the mouths of prisoners who had died while they were eating. Think about it, okay? If you, in your current state, or you're not hungry, you're not starving, and you were to be in that situation and you saw this kind of thing happening, you have a sense of human dignity, you have a sense of self-respect. So you would say ew, no, right? I would never do that. However, these people, when a person is driven to act this way, there's no room for such things as dignity and self-respect because they're starving. They're that desperate. The fact is that there are countless children in this world who are growing up in this kind of animalistic state of mind. So food problems also lead to crime, revolutions, and conflict, right? It erodes the human self. It deprives one of humanity, and that also includes the act of crime, the criminal acts, right? Act of evil, right? So the first example that I'm going to give is pirates. So many fishermen in Somalia, whose fishing industry has become unsustainable due to overfishing from foreign fishing boats, have no choice but to resort to piracy in order to feed their villages. They have to steal in order to feed their villages who are starving, right? They have no choice. Example 2 is revolutions. So the Nazi regime actually came to power in Germany because of the food problems stemming from economic issues from the First World War. And the 1917 Russian Revolution also began with domestic food problems. So these issues, so these revolutions that led to these, dictatorships in these communist countries, these communistic rising, were essentially caused because of food problem, and people were forced to, to that edge, right? Example 3 is conflict, right? When the Afghanistan farmers faced food shortages due to drought, they no longer had jobs, right? They were no longer making food, they were no longer making money. So they were forced to take up arms and join the Taliban in order to financially support themselves. So it's not that they wanted to join the Taliban, it's not that they wanted conflict, it was that they were forced to. So a person is pushed to commit crime, commit evil against their original mind when their family is starving, right? They're forced to do that. So hunger really leaves deep scars on future generations, right? A population that has experienced hunger as children, right, has to keep living with a vulnerable body, short, small, vulnerable, weak, right, as well as stunted brain development that leads to mental disabilities. These people will have absolutely no choice but to continue to live in poverty. And because of this, some will inevitably commit crimes such as murder. So after being disabled to this degree, it's too late to receive food or education later on, right? Towards such a population, how can we talk about peace and heavenly kingdom? We have to first create a situation where they can keep eating before ideological education or human rights movements can even be discussed. As such, it will take at least a generation to reach a solution to hunger. Think about it. A whole generation of children who suffers malnutrition will grow up and not be able to get out of malnutrition, right? And that continues on generationally, right? It's a generational poverty, generational hunger. So we have to have a solution, and it'll take at least a whole generation to actually reach the solution. So for us, who are aiming for world peace, who are talking about world peace, a world of unity, a world of equality, right? The food problem is a serious and urgent issue that we absolutely cannot ignore, especially if we follow true parents who love these people as their own children. How much pain do you think true parents feel in their hearts when they see this issue? The true father in his autobiography says, "To me, giving people food is the most precious work. When I am eating and I see someone who has nothing to eat, it pains my heart and I cannot continue eating." True father who had dreamt of a peaceful world where all suffering will be gone must have been deeply distressed by not being able to save the children who suffer from such miserable starvation. Think about true mother now, right? She must also see the news. She must see all the situation of the world, all the children who are suffering, and also herself suffer so much. And true father in heaven must also be suffering so much currently. So far we've been discussing the seriousness of hunger. So now let's take a look at how hunger occurs and persists. Let me take some water. Sorry. So now let's talk about what the cause of the hunger problem is. In order to even understand the plan that is Ocean Providence, we first need to understand the mechanism by which the hunger problem persists in today's world so that we are able to dismantle that mechanism. So hunger problem is a very, very complex issue, where some people say, poverty comes from laziness, people just need to work harder and then they'll get out of it. But after what we saw today, do you think that's always the case? No, right? Many food problems are caused by conflicts and natural disasters, meaning that poverty and hunger will happen regardless of working hard. These people have no choice but to be poor because of the situations they are in. Some might say it's because there's not enough education. But do you think that this problem can really be solved by just giving education to these people? No, right? We also talked about how people who are born into starvation grow up sickly with malnutrition, hindering brain development. So that means that no amount of education can actually help them by education itself. So hunger is really complex, right? It's full of different connections. The food issue isn't a standalone problem. It's not a standalone issue. It's actually interconnected with all these different issues, such as natural disaster, right? Climate change, right? The food issue is the result of a variety of world issues, war, economic hardships, climate change, and they all result in the food problem. So the food problem is the culmination of all these issues. So the cause of hunger, there's many causes of hunger, whether it be direct or indirect. But today, we will be looking at the 5 main causes of hunger. So one is poverty. 2, the vicious cycle between hunger and poverty. 3 is conflict. 4, political instability. And 5, the climate change and abnormal weather. So number 1 cause of hunger is poverty, being the main cause of hunger. So poverty is the main cause of hunger. Food is available, but people are not able to afford it because they are poor. They don't have money, right? So in many situations, there's enough food being produced, right? There's food in their area, right? In a person's area. However, in many cases, food is not able to reach those many poor areas. This is because of the fact that poor people usually live in areas where there's no money to buy it. So even if the food is brought to those areas, many people still wouldn't be able to afford it. They don't have the money for it. So poverty is a complex consequence of domestic resources, job shortages, misgovernment, economic inequality, conflict. So as a result, those who cannot afford to buy food experience hunger. Right, so there's a lack of resources, there's a lack of resources, there's inequality, there's misgovernment conflict, and naturally that leads to people being poor, not having money, and these people who are poor, who are in poverty, cannot get the food that they need. So then that leads to a food problem. Okay? So more than 10% of the world's population lives in this kind of extreme poverty, where, in other words, they're living on an income per person of about $1.50 per day. That's only $35 per month. And imagine living off of only $35 per month. Naturally, you will not be able to buy enough food for you, much less your whole family, in that kind of state. Cause number 2 is the vicious cycle between hunger and poverty. So basically, hunger causes poverty, and poverty causes more hunger, which causes more poverty. It's a whole cycle. So let's talk about that. So hunger causes physical disability, as we mentioned before, mental disorders, and perpetuates poverty because people are unable to work, so they're unable to make money, they're unable to get a job, so they continue to be in poverty, right? So many who grow up with hunger and malnutrition are physically and mentally weak, unable to work productively. This leads to chronic poverty that cannot be solved simply by education. Children who are born into families begin their lives stunted even during pregnancy, right? When the mom is malnourished, their child will naturally come out also malnourished. And the state of poverty is passed down through generations. So this is the cycle, right? So first it starts with an unhealthy pregnancy where the child is already malnourished during pregnancy, right? And they grow up in malnourishment, right? They grow up malnourished, right? Growing up stunted with a poor household. And then they become an adult who has health issues, who's prone to more health problems and mental health problems. And because of that, they're unable to live a productive life and they're unable to work. And because of that, they have no way to get money. They have no way to get out of poverty in the first place. And that just continues on this whole cycle. So this is the cycle of poverty experienced by the hungry population. Cause number 3 is more than half of the hungry population is affected by regional conflict, something called regional conflict. So conflict, right? Regional conflicts hinders logistics and bankrupt economies and makes the poor people even more poorer. So according to FAO, UN Food and Agriculture Organization, 490 million people out of the 810 million hungry people are directly or indirectly affected by regional conflict in 2017. So over half of the people who are starving, who are hungry because of the fact that there are regional conflicts in their areas. So that means like wars and stuff, right? So 75% of the stunted children we were talking about earlier live in these conflict areas. 3/4 of these children live in these areas. So internal conflicts basically end up destroying infrastructure, right? Displaces people, exacerbates domestic economies and worsens poverty. So the international community, different countries also don't want to invest in countries with conflict. So it makes it even more difficult for them to emerge from the ongoing economic crisis. So even if the conflict ends, they will still have struggles getting out of that state of poverty. And the people who are already poor in that country, once the conflict begins, they just continue to become even more and more poor. So this is the whole cycle, right? Hunger and conflict is in a cyclical relationship, just as poverty and hunger are, right? Civil war, so basically conflict, when there's conflict, it worsens poverty. And once poverty is worsened, it causes extreme inequality to worsen, poverty to worsen, and food problem to worsen. And when that happens, people become angry at the authorities, become angry at their government, become angry at the elites, and that causes more conflict. And that conflict sometimes leads to revolution, oftentimes actually leads to dictatorship and communism. So civil wars and revolutions are often triggered by the anger at those in power because of the extreme inequality and starvation caused by those in power. So at the same time, civil war worsens the plight of already hungry people. And in any war, the poor suffer the most. Not the rich people, not the middle class, the poor. Right? Anger caused by hunger and inequality can sometimes become the driving force behind dictatorships and communist regimes in times of extreme economic instability. Hitler and Stalin can be cited as examples. Now, cause number 4 is political instability, which drives a loss of value to national currency and worsens poverty. So political instability is another huge cause. So political instability leads to economic instability and exacerbates poverty, right? So even when there is no conflict, so let's say, for example, Korea, right? North Korea. North Korea is not in a state of war or anything like that, right? It's not in war with any other country. However, even if there's no conflict, a country with severe political corruption, such as North Korea, and misgovernment will lack international trust and cannot receive external investment. Other countries do not want to interact with, do not want to invest in, do not want to be put together with North Korea because of that corruption. And it also cannot respond well to international situations such as the COVID-19 pandemic and cannot expect economic growth because they're not receiving support from anyone else. An economic downturn lowers incomes, causes weak currency inflation, and worsens the poverty problem. In the case of countries that engage in inhumane politics, they are also subject to international economic sanctions. So Venezuela and North Korea fits this kind of pattern and suffer from the hunger problem. And if you see pictures of North Koreans in North Korea, you can actually see how they are affected by malnourishment and stunting. Cause number 5 is abnormal weather such as climate change. So climate change causes floods, droughts, typhoons, and it's causing these things to be a lot more frequent, which impacts grain harvests, right? Over the past 30 years, right, extreme weather events have been becoming more frequent. Floods, droughts, typhoons, hurricanes, they've been becoming more frequent, and this directly affects the crop yields. Think about it, right? You're a farmer, and when you farm, you have to rely on the fact that the next season is going to be the season when I plant seeds. The next season is when I'm going to harvest, right? So farmers basically rely on a consistent, yearly seasonal pattern. However, because of these frequent, sudden, extreme abnormal weather, they're unable to do that. And naturally, the amount of crop yield that they have lessens. So it's said that locust plagues also and the outbreaks of new pathogenic viruses will also become frequent due to the change in climate. So climate change is expected to displace 1.2 billion people by 2050 because of water shortages, reduced harvests, and rising water levels. And many scientists predict that the climate change will become a major cause of hunger in the near future. Truefather also talks about this. He was very aware of all the issues of the world, including global warming and climate change. In 2011 in Las Vegas, he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, close to 1 billion people today are suffering due to hunger. On average, one person dies of malnutrition every 6 seconds. 20 million people die every year. Of greatest concern is the number of children who are losing their lives due to malnutrition. The UN proclaimed that it would cut the number of the starving population in half by the end of 2015, yet output of corn and other crops has dwindled due to global warming, and experts predict that the rate of starvation will double by the year of 2020. Where can we find a solution to this serious issue?" Truefather asks. "The solution lies in the world's oceans, which covers 75% of the Earth's surface and are rich repositories of natural resources. The oceans are treasure stores of raw materials that can revive the Earth, which is dying due to environmental pollution and resource depletion, and promise humankind a bright future." So Truefather was very aware of the fact that global warming and climate change would heavily affect the world hunger issue. And actually, if you do some research on the ocean actually produces almost more than half of the world's oxygen. So we're all talking about planting trees. However, the ocean really needs focusing right now because the oceans is really um, the life, sorry, the life source of the earth. So True Father understood this. True Father saw this issue and that it could solve world hunger. So let's summarize, right? Almost all of the world's political, economic, and environmental problems lead to hunger. So many issues. So there's so many issues in this world, but almost all of it lead to hunger. Right? Whether it's war, climate change, the global economy, or pandemic, in the end, it's the poor who are the most affected. In this way, various world issues lead to the problem of hunger among the poor. So, the hunger problem, the cycle of poverty is affected by climate change, pandemic, the Ukrainian war right now, all these different things, they are all culminating within the hunger problem. So far we discussed how serious the hunger problem is, its causes, but why is hunger so difficult to resolve? Why is it so hard to just, why is it so hard to just like go away hunger? You know what I mean? Right? So despite all the economic and technological breakthroughs humanity has made so far, right? We even went to the moon, right? So we even went to Mars or whatever, or we're planning to, right? So why do you think, even despite all these technological advancements, why is it that we are still unable to solve the problem of hunger? Well, in recent years, hunger was actually showing a downward trend, right? So less people were being hungry year by year amidst the world economic growth. But since 2014, it has slowly began increasing again. WFP predicts that there will be over 840 million hungry people by the year of 2030. However, that same organization, WFP, also calls the hunger problem the world's most solvable problem, right? So the WFP actually points out the fact that although the world has enough food to feed all of mankind, the food is not reaching the ones that need it. That's why they are calling the hunger problem the world's most solvable problem. So what are they talking about? Actually, humanity is producing 12 billion food enough for 12 billion people. And this world only has 8 billion human beings, right? However, so that means we have 4 billion so we have food enough for 4 billion extra people. So we have a lot of surplus food. However, for some reason, we still have 9 million people dying from hunger every single day. Why is that, right? According to the WFP, current food production is sufficient. If there's enough food, why hasn't the hunger problem been solved? The problem is not production, but is distribution, right? Technological innovation has enabled modern humanity to produce more food and more efficiently and reliably than any other time in human history. Humanity at this point produces enough food for all humankind. However, the problem lies in the distribution of this food, the where the food goes, how the food is traveling the world, right? So the food does not reach the starving people who need it most. This is true both internationally and in many cases nationally. So distribution problem, example number 1. So there are more obese people than hungry people in the world. That means there are more people who have more food, more than enough food than the amount of people who need the food that they're not getting. So the IFRC reported that in 2010, 925 million people in the world were undernourished, but at the same time, 1.5 billion people were suffering from obesity. In other words, there are more people in the world who suffer from the condition of having too much food than people who have not enough food. Distribution problem example number 2 is that 30 to 40% of the food is being discarded in the US. There's a lot of food waste. So in the United States, which is the world's largest exporter of food, is the largest exporter of food, but in 2020, the FDA announced that 30 to 40% of that food is actually just wasted every single year. 60 billion kilos of food is discarded in the United States. This is in 2010, right? And 60 billion kilos of food is enough to feed 66 million starving people. However, instead of feeding those people, that 60 billion kilos of food is being discarded instead of being given to those people. Distribution problem example number 3 is that the food issue exists even within a major food producing exporting nation. So for example, Paraguay. Paraguay is a small country in South America with a very, very small population of 7.1 million people, right? And its the world's largest, fourth largest export of soybeans, sixth largest export of corn, of meat, right? It's a major export of food, which means they're producing a lot of food. However, the UN reports that Paraguay, it produces 9 times as much food as its population needs. However, 10% of its population is still experiencing hunger. So Paraguay produces 9 times as much food as they need. However, 10% of them are hungry. Where does that food disappear to? Well, the answer is easy. Most of that produced food is just exported. It's not given to the Paraguayans who are starving. It's given to other countries, right? And because of that, the food is not given to the hungry 10% of the population. Why do you think such a thing is possible? Why does the government let that happen? Well, in Paraguay, like many other countries in the world, it has a free market system and a capitalistic economy. And capitalism's tendency is to maximize individual profit, meaning that the motivation behind capitalist society, behind capitalist individuals, capitalist companies, the motivation is for money, for individual profit, right? So that basically means that the hungry people who usually have no money, right, to give, often live in areas also with poor logistics. So that means it even costs a lot of money to even get to those poor people. So basically companies who are looking to maximize their individual profit, companies who basically want to make more money if they were to give money, or if they were to transport food to poor people, then they would not only be not gaining money, but they would also be losing money. So that basically means they have very little to zero incentive to actually help those poor people, especially because they have that capitalistic ideology. So let's talk about capitalism, right? There's a chronic disease within capitalism and imperialistic economy and society, which is inequality, right? So historically, capitalism has brought amazing productivity. However, despite that, along with extreme prosperity that capitalism has brought, it has also brought inequality. At the same time, this extreme prosperity was accompanied by a chronic condition called inequality, in which most of the benefits of the economic and technological progress are enjoyed only by a small percentage, which are wealthy, the wealthy population, and only the developed nations and not the third world countries. So basically, there is enough resources, however, it is not shared. Jesus says in John 3:17, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? There's enough food, there's enough positions, enough material positions, but there's so many brothers and sisters who have no food, who have no material positions. So we should be giving it to them, right? According to Jesus' word. And if we have love of God in us, then we would be giving those people the food. However, we are not. So in this sense, hunger is a phenomenon occurring in the profit-oriented society, a society motivated by money that has lost the love of God. So hunger is a phenomenon that most acutely expresses the unreasonable inequality that exists between the brothers and sisters under God, when humankind should really just be one family who cares for one another and not trying to exploit each other for money. So why is hunger so difficult to resolve? Well, let's summarize. Number one, first of all, the food problem is a complex and humongous problem, and it's interconnected to various social issues such as war, economy, environmental problems. Therefore, half-hearted efforts, and power cannot resolve this problem. So in order to solve the hunger issue, we must have a vast economic base and influence in the world in order to even affect this issue. Number two is also the food does not reach the poor, even when we have enough food, even if we have enough resources that exist. And that's because society is profit-oriented. Society is basically motivated by selfish money. So the hunger problem cannot be solved unless an organization or a country with a new ideology that is not profit-oriented emerges. So let's talk about, so we discussed about the difficulty of solving the hunger problem. We discussed how terrible and difficult it is, right? And the UN and many nonprofit organizations of the world have tried to solve this issue, but have not been able to do so, right? So then how did True Father, just, one man, try to solve this, intractable, seemingly impossible hunger problem? Well, True Father says we can do it with the teachings of the Unification Church and the Ocean Providence. He says, with the teachings of the Unification Church and the Ocean Providence, our church members are making comprehensive preparations to solve the world's food shortage. With this, the entire world can find hope. So basically, he was saying there are two aspects that we need in order to help the world. First is the ideological internal problem, which is the profit-first mindset of society. Society is basically fueled by this mindset of profit, right? Of selfish profit, of selfish gain, of money. However, the solution, and so therefore the solution to that would be words, would be teachings, would be true parents' teachings of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. The external problem is inequality and distribution, right? Which causes hunger. So the solution to that is Ocean Providence, which was the plan to equalize all resources throughout the world. So True Father is basically attempting to solve the food problem by preparing both the ideological and the practical foundation. So number one, the solution to ideological issues, which is through the words and teachings. So we have concluded that hunger is a phenomenon that's basically happening because of the profit for society, because of a society that is motivated by money. But how can we solve this issue? Well, philosophically, the only solution to that ideology is to combat it with a better ideology centered on God, which is interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values, which promotes living and prospering together as a whole, a family under God. In the Divine Principle, it talks about this. It says, likewise, movements to further the ideals of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values arose on God's side, but communism was born on Satan's side in order to demolish economic systems which concentrated a society's wealth in the hands of a privileged few. Each of these movements has sought to establish a system which would distribute wealth more equally among people. So in other words, the economic ideology that will ultimately solve all economic issues in the last days is the ideology of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. So what is the spirit of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values? Well, in True Father's autobiography, he says, siblings symbolize human beings around the world. The experience of loving our brothers and sisters in the family teaches us how to love our fellow countrymen and love humanity. Our love for our own siblings expands in this way. The family whose members love each other is a model of how humanity can live together in harmony. Love among siblings means that one sibling is willing to go hungry, if necessary, so that his brother or sister can eat. A global leader is someone who loves humanity as he loves his own family. So the spirit of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values is basically the spirit of seeing everybody in the world as your sibling, as your family, and you're willing to give for their sake. You're willing to starve for their sake. Number two, so the solution to the external issue is through Ocean Providence. So merely speaking about ideologies, right, only talk about internal things does not actually physically substantially change the world. So True Father began the Ocean Providence in order to solve these practical issues of the world. So the UN, various NPOs, they've tried to solve hunger problem by mobilizing a lot of people and money. However, it's been half-hearted and it's not enough to actually solve it. So True Father's attempt was to create an unshakable economic foundation through the ocean that can have enormous impact on the world. And this detailed plan will be explained in the part 2 of this webinar series. So True Father says, I will create a global organization that will bring together people from all walks of life, including those in the financial field based on their shared love of recreational activities. I believe this will be a shortcut to guiding all people toward a world of peace. And that is why for several decades, I have been researching, planning, and pioneering all sorts of ocean-related businesses. So in summary, right, because it was a lot, right, we first talked about how hunger started historically. We talked about the history, right? We talked about how the world was originally intended for the sake of living a hobby lifestyle. However, due to the fall, mankind now suffers in order to obtain food. And then we talked about why the hunger issue is so great, and why we have to care about why it's so serious and urgent. And we concluded that it creates persistent poverty for generations, causing physical and psychological harm. And this is harming millions of people throughout the world. And we also talk about how hunger happens, which is because of, various causes, various problems in the world, such as war, economy, environmental problems, all these things culminating in the hunger issue. And then we also talked about why hunger is so difficult to solve, And we conclude that it's because, even though we have enough resources and technology to solve the issue, we are not able to do it because our society is profit-centric, and it's motivated by self-gain. So how did True Father try to solve the hunger problem? We talked about how True Father aimed to solve the hunger problem through, first of all, the economic ideology of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values, which would combat the profit-centric ideology, and Ocean Providence, which was the plan established to basically establish a vast oceanic foundation which could affect and help the world. So in this part 1 intro to Ocean Providence, basically, we've been discussing the purpose of Ocean Providence, the heart of true parents, and the major issues of the world, such as hunger. And in the upcoming part 2, Ocean Church and the Substantive Plan, we will actually discuss in detail about the 20-year plan, which can be said to be the basis for the North American Ocean Providence centered on true parents. So we've talked about world hunger and how bad it is, right? But now, the next part of the series, we're going to finally start talking about the actual plan, about the plan of action, the actual steps True Father was planning to take in order to help resolve this huge issue of hunger. Thank you for coming. Yeah.